The Prime Minister, the Chancellor and the Secretary of State and at least 50 Labour MPs promised their constituents in the July election that GB Energy would save them £300 a year of their energy bills. They said it on their election literature, on social media and in hustings. They said it because they were told to by the Secretary of State. But I listened very closely to his speech today and I didn't hear him make a promise that GB Energy will save them £300 on their energy bills. The Energy Minister, in a debate just before the summer recess, he wouldn't repeat the promise either. Yep. And that's because they all know it's not true. And in fact, one of their first acts in government has been to take away up to £300 from 10 million pensioners this winter, including 2/3 of pensioners in poverty. And it takes some nerve for the party opposite to say they never wanted to do this, because the winter fuel payment was in his party's manifesto when he wrote it in 2010. It was in there when he was leader in 2015. It was in there in 2017 and 2019, but in 2024 it was omitted. No mention at all, for the first time in 14 years. And I will give credit to the right honourable gentleman, something that I don't always do, that when he was leader in 2015, he put in his manifesto that he would take it away from the top 5% of pensioners. He will remember that. He had the courtesy of telling the public his plans. But I also suggest that means, professional politician that he is, that he would have clocked that it wasn't included this time round. He's been in politics for 30 years. He would have known what that meant. So I hope he can confirm today whether he had any conversations with the Prime Minister or the Chancellor or Morgan before the manifesto came out. Because if so, he sent out those Labour candidates, all the people on the benches behind him, with this false promise of the £300 energy savings, when someone clearly knew that they were going to take that amount away from millions of pensioners this winter. I will give way on that point.
Most grateful, because she referred to the letter that was sent by the Secretary of State to Fintan Sly, the head of National Grid ESO. And curiously, there is nothing in the Secretary of State's letter that refers to the need to lower electricity prices. The term electricity prices doesn't appear in the letter. And the term security of supply doesn't appear either. Now, these are the two great concerns about rushing the 2030 decarbonisation target. Does she agree?
Well, I absolutely agree, and I'll come on to that point. But the thing that I will say is there will be a vote next week on the winter fuel payment. I think the government has confirmed that. And everybody heard the Secretary of State. If you want to break the whip, if you want to stand out from the crowd, I'm sure you will have his encouragement.
He said it.
Now let's come back to those savings. I will make a bit more progress, actually. So let's come back to those savings. He's promised bill savings by 2030 through GB Energy. I believe that's correct. The question is, how? Does he have any serious energy expert who thinks that's possible with an investment of £8 billion over 5 years? That's a drop in the ocean when it comes to energy investment. It's a fraction of the amount of investment he is deterring from the private sector into clean energy with his plans to shut down the North Sea. He talked about offshore wind, nuclear and hydrogen in his founding statement. None of those things get built in 5 years. So let's be honest, the likelihood of his plans bringing any power online by 2030 is tiny. The idea that it will be enough to lower bills across households is frankly for the birds. And when we asked his department how much energy he wanted to enable through this bill, his department said it will be looked at in due course. That's just not good enough. Promise number 2, I will just make some more progress. Promise number 2, clean power by 2030. GB Energy was supposed to be the silver bullet to reach his target of a decarbonised grid by 2030. We'll come on to whether that's a good idea a bit later. But to do that, he said that he needed £28 billion a year. His chief secretary to the Treasury talked about hundreds of billions of pounds, and he has in fact secured from his Chancellor £1.6 billion a year. He talked about national ownership. This is not enough money to do that. He knows it's not enough. He himself thought his plans would cost vastly more, and yet he's promising to do it all now with 6% of the funds. It's just not credible. Promise number 3. Madam Deputy Speaker, the government says that every project that GB Energy invests in, and I quote, in every single one, there will be a return for the British taxpayer. That's what the Energy Minister said on the 26th of July, and members can check their Hansard if they like. Every single project. Now, what they're telling industry is very different. What they're saying to industry is that they're going to use that money, £8 billion of taxpayers' money, to de-risk their projects. I believe the Secretary of State said that in his speech today. So what does that mean? That means they will be investing in the parts of those projects that those energy companies do not expect to be profitable. So can I ask, what is it about the Secretary of State's vast private sector experience, which he gained as a researcher at Channel 4, that makes him think that he can turn a profit where experienced multi-million-pound energy companies cannot? He's not set out an expected financial rate of return, any risk profile, or a time frame for these returns. These are the minimum things anyone seeking investment should set out. And I can say that, Madam Deputy Speaker, as someone who is financially trained. I know the right honourable gentleman is not, but this is basic stuff. And here's the problem. If his goal is to give taxpayers a good deal, he should be investing on commercial rates, which would just displace private sector capital and wouldn't speed up his decarbonisation targets, produce more energy or lower bills. But if his goal is to de-risk more speculative projects, and that is the line he's giving industry in the thing he said today, then by definition, he'll be throwing taxpayers' money into the least attractive parts of investments, the parts that multi-million-pound companies don't want. And the risk is this, that GB Energy, far from generating any profit for taxpayers, it will become a skip for all and everyone to put their problems and their failures aside. And this is crucial, Madam Deputy Speaker, because we cannot let them repeat at a national scale what Labour councils have done at a local level. Robin Hood Energy, they've grown, Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, but I think they'd like to think about what local taxpayers have had to face. Robin Hood Energy in Nottingham, which collapsed, left taxpayers with debts of £38 million. Bristol Energy, which failed and cost residents £43 million. Warrington Stake and Together Energy, which left residents with a potential liability of £37 million. These were small-time projects with budgets in the tens of millions.
Order, Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Hear what the Shadow Secretary of State's saying. There's so much noise going on the front bench. They don't want to hear what she's saying because it might be true.
I thank my right honourable friend for that comment. He will know that's not a point of order, but would the Shadow Secretary of State please proceed?
And look, I think this is really important because this is taxpayers' money we're talking about. And these were small-time projects with budgets in tens of millions. I will in a second. But this Secretary of State is asking for a budget of billions of pounds with no plans. I think he mentioned a couple of companies in his speech. He mentioned EDF, which made a loss of €17 billion in 2022. He mentioned Ørsted, which made a loss of €2.7 billion in 2023. So I think it is right that we ask some of these questions.
The right honourable lady mentions Robin Hood Energy and other local energy companies, which were in fact supply companies. What we're talking about here is a great British energy company which would be generating energy. You simply do not understand that. You are making a mistake about the plans that we are making, and you've got a distinction which is failing to understand what is actually going on and suggesting that something is going to happen which is not going to happen.
If the honourable lady would bravely like to say that it will generate company, I'm sure she would like to tell us how much energy it will generate, because no one else seems able to.
Nobody knows, yeah.
But finally, I will make some progress, I'm sorry. Finally, the Secretary of State, and this is really important, the Secretary of State pays lip service to nuclear. But we know that when Labour were last in power, they started not a single nuclear power plant in all of 14 years. And all summer, there's been an eerie silence. The capital raise on Sizewell C, which should be out by now, nothing. The small modular reactor competition, which should be deciding its final projects now, nothing. We committed to a third large-scale nuclear power plant at Wilver, but again, nothing. We wrote to the Energy Minister, but once again, he's refused to confirm any detail or regarding Wilver whether those plans are even in place. So can the Secretary of State answer, is the creation of GB Energy slowing down these projects? I will continue. It's causing the timetable of these programmes, which will provide clean, cheap energy, to slip. Once again, we've simply got no answers. And I find all of this very strange, because at our last encounter in this House, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Secretary of State was keen to confess that he was a super nerd. Now, as someone who's been a lifelong mathlete, I am the first person to want to champion a fellow super nerd. But I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that when I meet super nerds, they normally like evidence, they like facts, they like numbers. But whenever you look at what the Right Honourable Gentleman has set out, there are no numbers attached. He talks about decarbonising the grid by 2030, but he hasn't set out the full systems cost of that. He promises profits and bill savings from GB Energy, but he can't tell you when or how much. And when it comes to this bill and his 2030 target, it's clear the Secretary of State doesn't have the numbers, because 2 weeks ago he wrote a letter to the Director of the Electricity Systems Operator. I've got it here. Do you know what he said, Madam Deputy Speaker? Please provide practical advice on achieving clean power by 2030, including a high-level assessment of costs. We're talking about people's energy bills, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think the public would like a detailed look at what this is going to cost them. And then to top it off, he asked the Director to advise what actions his government should take to enable delivery, clearly setting out what further work is required. The evidence couldn't be clearer. He went into a general election with a pledge, with no idea how to achieve it, what it will cost, or whether it's achievable at all. I will happily give way.
Much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and this is the exact point that I wanted to make, and I was very keen for the Secretary of State to take my intervention on this, because the key point, the practical, the tangible point that my constituents want to know is when they will see the £300 saving that he promised them during the general election, and that's what really impacts families and households up and down this country. So when it comes to the summing up of this legislation later on in the day, I wondered if he could restate his commitment to households about that £300 saving.
Well, I thank the Right Honourable Lady. I think that's a very, very fair question, and I hope the Minister, who I'm assuming is going to wrap up today, will be able to provide some detail. But far from being a super word, I will in just a moment, far from being a super nerd, Madam Deputy Speaker, the truth is the Right Honourable Gentleman is the ultimate career politician. He comes up with big titles, he makes big promises to the public, but he has no idea how to deliver. And my big fear is this, and I should listen because it's an important point, that he's losing focus on all of the amazing technologies that will come online after 2030, whether that's fusion energy, the next generation of nuclear reactors, or carbon capture. These are the innovative new technologies that won't just deal with the 1% of emissions in the UK, but the 99% produced overseas. In government, I focused a lot of my time on speeding up the development of those technologies. We launched the £1 billion Green Industries Growth Accelerator to specifically reduce any supply chain constraints, for example, on cables. We provided almost £200 million to help the UK become the first commercial producer of advanced nuclear fuel outside of Russia. And we were making Britain one of the most exciting places in the world for fusion energy development with £600 million of funding. And I will give way on that point.
I thank her for giving way, finally. She is criticising the government for the rush target of decarbonising the grid by 2030. Can she just enlighten the House and when the Conservative Party would decarbonise the grid?
I will. And I think this is a really critical point, and I've made this point in recent weeks. The point about having a longer time to decarbonise is it gives you time to develop British supply chains. That is exactly what I was doing. If you look at the Green Industries Growth Accelerator and some of the things that I've talked about, it gave us time to set up British companies. Now, those things cannot be done in 5 years. You need to get project finance, you need to hire workers, you need to train them, you need to get planning permission. There is a huge amount that you need to do. So the fact that the Secretary of State wants to rush this transition and make it happen at breakneck speed is risking British jobs and livelihoods, and it is making us dependent on Chinese supply chains. So in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Secretary of State has promised many things with this bill, but he simply cannot set out any detail about the things that he wants to deliver. So it would be a blank cheque for £8 billion of taxpayers' money with no plan, no evidence, no numbers for the bill savings or profits that he has been promising the British public. And that is why we cannot support the bill as it stands. Yeah.